All right. Good? Okay, perfect. Hello, folks. So I got the fortunate opportunity to speak here today instead of Sergio. So my name is Jonas. I'm the release coordinator for v3 of AsyncAPI. And I haven't planned anything. So we're kind of just taking it as we go. So how many here knows about v3 or have heard of it? Okay, 5% maybe, give or take. All right, so yeah, let's jump straight into it. One of the main triggers for v3 was something we call publish and subscribe confusion. How many here have been confused about subscribe and publish in the v3 spec? And that's about 90%. All right, so yeah, let's jump straight into it. So I have a very simple application that wants to consume from users signed up. I want to consume whenever a user sign up for whatever my system is. And here you can see that I use the publish keyword, which means that others are publishing to my application because I am consuming from it. So it's a flipped definition if you're defining it from the application's point of view. So through long discussions, we ended up with a very, very simple. You define exactly what your application does. Do you receive something? Do you send something? Those are kind of the only two kind of operations that you have. As you can probably see on the example, there's way more changes than just a publish and subscribe confusion. So have anyone ever wanted to reference channels? Share them between applications? Okay, 2%, 5% maybe. So what we did was we would like to be able to reuse channels. Channels should only define exactly what is on the topic, which means headers, what are the messages, and what's the address. So the way that we did that is that we removed the entire operation, split it out into a new root keyword, where you define exactly what are the operations that your application is performing. That's it. The channels just define the means of the operation. Yeah, and then in the operation itself, you then reference what is the channel that your operation is performing this action on. Any questions so far? No? Okay. As you probably noticed, we changed how you define messages for channels. You no longer define it as for example, one of the major ones is not using one-off, but just defining a simple message. Here, we kind of split it into that you define it as a key value pair. And instead of having a one-off, you just define the messages with an ID, and then, of course, the message definition. Yeah. Next one of the major ones is request reply. Have anyone tried to define request reply in v2 at all? Or wanted to? 1, 2, I have as well, 3. So it was pretty much impossible, especially with the flip meaning of the operation keywords. So we have had maybe 4 or 5 specific meetings just for request reply and this that you see in event-driven architecture instead of just the regular HTTP request that we see in OpenAPI and how they support it. So we actually have kind of 4 use cases that we focused on. We have the very, very simple request reply pattern where you are using different channels. So for example, in this, like we see here, we have the ping and pong, which is you as the application is sending the ping request on the ping channel, and you expect a reply on the channel pong. So that's a very, very simple form of a request, how an application can request something. A replier is as simple as just changing the action keyword. So what it means is that in this application, it's actually responsible for replying to that ping request. So that means that it's receiving a ping, and then it's replying with a pong, or over the pong channel. And then we dive into kind of the more advanced request reply patterns. One of them are, well, what if you don't know the reply address, where to send the reply at design time, but you don't know it until you actually reach runtime. So what we did instead was that we allow you to define an address as null, meaning at design time we have no idea what the address is. But in the reply section, we further specify that the address itself for this specific reply is coming from, well, maybe I should do this. It's coming from the message header, where it has a reply to field. And at runtime, it uses this field to know where to send the reply. Another example is, well, what if you want to send the request reply over the same channel? You have it in HTTP, you have it in WebSocket. So what you're allowed to do is that you can define both of these with the same address. You can also merge them together as one, but here it's pretty clear that one is ping and has a specific message, and the other is for pong. And we are still using the very same request reply definition as we did in the first examples. So what if this is kind of an extension to the one we saw before, where you have multiple messages over the same channel or the same address? Here you can merge them together as well. So you can define multiple messages over the same channel definition that's using the same address, but has one or more messages. And you can then, in the ping or in the operation, you can then define that on this specific request, we are only interested in one message, ping. We don't care about that it can also be pong, but we further specify here or specific targeting what message we are interested in. And we can then do the same for the reply, where we specify that, well, we want the ping when or we want the pong when we send the ping. Any questions for request reply? No? Okay. So back to this. Have anyone ever, let's see, so how many are using different message payloads? That's not the default schema type. One? One. Okay. Two, maybe two. So yeah, one of the problems is that in V2, you're not able to reference a different schema payload, or, for example, assign this schema format to that specific schema. So you wouldn't be able to reference like having a single reference that then contains both these information. In v3, we moved it into something called a multi-schema format object, I think. And it's basically just a conjunction of this property, schema format, that was part of the message, and then the payload. So now you can have this in the component sections together, and then just have a single reference without having to duplicate the schema format property multiple times. Traits. Anyone using traits? 1, 2, 3. Okay. So in v2, one of the things with traits is that if you would define it like this, where there's duplicate information, such as here where we have two descriptions, like we have the description in traits and we have the description in the root object. What would happen is that it would override that value. In the new, in v3, we changed this behavior. So if you define multiple or duplicate properties, that would mean that it's no longer overriding it, but it just adds, for example, in this here, we only add summary to that specific object, which kind of allows some kind of inheritance. URLs. How many are defining servers in their AsyncAPI application document? Anyone defining servers at all? 1, 2, 3. So one of the problems with v2 is that you kind of have duplicate information here. When you define the URL of the specific server, sometimes you will find that the URL contains the protocol in the same way that you define the protocol beneath, or maybe you're only doing one of those things. And the URL itself is also a little bit confusing, because then, for example, for the addresses, do they then get assigned to that URL as well, or how does that work? So we wanted to split it out into, well, basically 3 properties. We still have the same protocol, but now we have a host instead of the URL that are only describing the host information. That's it. It doesn't have anything to do with protocols. You don't need to format it in any specific way other than just the host. And then you have the path name afterwards. So this one is probably going to be a little bit weird. So there's 2 things here. In v2, you will probably see multiple cases where, for example, for the server security, if you have an OAuth test security definition, it must match this ID down here. It's implicit, but not explicit. So it means that you have to know exactly how the AsyncAPI definition works in order to know that those 2 are connected. Instead, we wanted to standardize this. So there's no more implicit references anywhere in the specification. Everything is explicit now. That also means that in this case, for the security example, we did have to add an extra field for the security schema called scopes, at least for OAuth, where you then define, well, what your scope would have been up here, but instead you define it in the actual component section instead. And we have the same in channels. If you want the channel to only operate over a specific server, you could implicitly define it with servers and then say production. But this production ID must match the one that you have up here in your server's definition. If it doesn't, at least the parser will give you an error. And the same thing happens for well, we just change it to a reference instead. There's a bunch of other features as well in the specification, but this is kind of what I tried to prepare this morning. So what else do we have? Oh yeah, so we're moving some fields around as well. Let me see. First of all, is there any general questions about v3, maybe? Before I just waste some time on the last minutes with some extra details. Any questions? It doesn't have to be v3 specifically, but it can be a process, it can be, yeah?
Yeah, hi, it's Ben from Solid. So I would have a question about the migration strategy from V2 to V3. We have a lot of customers using V2, and they would ask us, yeah, what would you recommend? How should we do that? Is it on? Yeah, okay. So hi again, it's Ben from Solace. My question is about the migration strategy from V2 to V3, as we have a lot of customers using V2, and they would ask us, what would you recommend to migrate towards V3? So any ideas or suggestions would be great.
Everything in v3 has already been implemented in the converter, or most of it. There are some edge cases where the converter can't handle the input, where you have to do a little bit of extra work yourself. But generally, as you can see on the screen here, our CLI can convert v3 documents already. So that's one of the things. Secondly, there is going to be a migration guide specifically for this. So this entire page is going to be on release as well, where we explicitly go through all of the different things that are different and that has been changed from v2 to v3. And it details both with a more interactive guide for how things have changed from v2 to v3, but it's also giving you specific examples on each individual breaking change, for example, that you have to handle. And giving examples for them. Those are the same examples that I have used in, that I have shown you so far. So yeah, and of course, as soon as if you use the converter and it doesn't handle what you want it to handle, create an issue so we can fix it. Thank you for the question.
Very much.
Any other questions?
Yes. One of the most promising features of V3, I think, is that you separate the channels from the operations, and that brings the possibility of have menus of channels just for the company. So do you have any example or use cases that you have in mind about how can companies implement this, separating the channels from the actions? And because I think it brings a lot of possibility to V3.
I have a few cases where I'm pretty excited to use that in my own projects. One of the things are, I would expect that I will have a specific AsyncAPI file only defining channels. That's for my broker. That defines all the channels, all the messages, but it defines none of the operations of each application. From there, I can then, for each application, I simply reference those channels. They are always up to date. And then I define only the operations that my application is performing. That's it. That's one of the things that I'm mostly looking forward to, for sure. What are you looking forward to? Are you seeing a use case?
I'm exactly looking forward the same thing, but maybe I'm thinking it in the other way around, because I think that if you have an AsyncAPI file for all the channels for an organization, maybe it's going to become a bottleneck for managing that. But I think you can do it. It brings a lot of possibility and flexibility. You can do it the other way around, where each application is the owner of some channels, and then you have a menu of channels that reference those applications. So once you onboard one application, the menu of channels will be always updated. And because you can have multiple menus of channels, you can have one menu of channels for this domain, for the whole application, or for just for one saga, or for one replay response. There are a lot of possibilities, and that's why I'm asking if maybe we can create some place in the blog or in the documentation for people to share ideas, because I think this brings a lot of possibility, and that's why I was asking about your vision.
For sure, those are all the use cases for, like, we need specific design patterns for how you use AsyncAPI, and there's going to be multiple. And the website is probably the very best example. Like, get them on the website. And there's going to be multiple, but that's the, what's it called? Like, there's so many possibilities, which is the great side about it. But yeah, I agree. Like that thing about, for example, if an application is owning a specific topic, and then you only define the channel there, and if others, you can reference it. Yeah, perfect. Others? No? All right. How long? Like 10 minutes? No, 7 minutes? Yeah? Okay, so there's, of course, way more changes. And I haven't covered them all. I probably won't cover everything. But it's close. Let's see. Oh yeah, the only thing I haven't covered is that we are moving a few metadata. So in V2, in the root object, you would have tags, and you would have external documentation or external docs. But it didn't really make a lot of sense, since all of the metadata is part of the info object. So it was decided to move those two informations into the info object instead. Oh yeah, optional channels. There's no longer a requirement in V3 to specify the channels. That means that you can have an empty AsyncAPI object, document like this. You don't have to define it like this. Because we have seen this before, because people were using like the AsyncAPI document to define a menu of things. A menu of messages, a menu of channels. So you no longer have to do that workaround in order to do that specific use case. But yeah, that's actually all of the changes, I think. New trades, yeah. Yeah. One more. Have anyone ever wondered how a parameter of type Boolean is going to be encoded in the channel address, for example? One? Fran is the only one. He's also the one that proposed this change. So one of the things of parameters was that in V2, you could define it entirely as well, basically a JSON schema object. So you could define exactly how you wanted those parameters to validate. But that also meant that you could actually define a parameter as an object, for example. But how do you take an object and simplify it down into the address? There's no definition for this. Instead, what we did is everything is strings. There's no Boolean. You can do a Boolean, but then it's a string encoded Boolean. You can't define numbers, it's also just a string, but you can of course use numbers. So we simplified the parameter schema all the way down to the very bare minimum. This is and it's only supporting enum, default, description, examples, and location. It's probably not going to be enough because we have seen a few comments about this where maybe you would like a pattern property, for example, to define that this is a number, this is an email, whatever. So probably that's going to change a little bit in 3.1, but propose it. If you see something where you're using different properties that are no longer available, let us know. But that's it. That's all I got. That's all the changes, actually. So thank you.